Hello, hello, sweet honeybees, and welcome to the Electric Honey Pot, where energy is the nectar of life. My name is Autumn, and this whole project is about the human experience, the good, the bad, the ugly, and all of the magic that happens in between. On this channel, on my podcast, I have spoken quite a bit about mental health, whether it's discussing my own struggles with mental health or the struggles of others or the importance of checking in on yourself or checking in on your loved ones. I have also mentioned several different times that I have had multiple suicide attempts, but I have not really dug deep into what that experience was like, how it came to be, the traumatization that I experienced through forced hospitalizations as a preteen and a teenager. And I just kind of want to dive into that in that episode, talk about what I went through, how it affected me, and how my viewpoints on the way Western society approaches topics like mental health has evolved as I have been going through my healing journey and I've had a spiritual awakening. I feel like Western society places a lot of labels on people that have unprocessed trauma and they deem them as broken. That way, they can force pharmaceuticals on them because they make money off of that. And it also dims people's lights because they're reliant on this substance. You are not your most authentic self by being 100% reliant on this substance. And that is not me saying that medicines can't be beneficial for people, because they absolutely can. They can be tools to help people. But ultimately, in my opinion, pharmaceuticals, medications are a band-aid on a much deeper problem within our society. And my perspectives on certain mental illnesses have also been shifting as I have been going through my own spiritual awakening process, because I have realized if I were to talk to a therapist or a psychiatrist about some of the things that I am experiencing and my reality, I would be diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I am absolutely aware of what is reality and what is not reality, but I also understand that reality is not what we have been told that it is, and that it is so much deeper than just this 3D world that we are currently living within. With all of that being said, I want to start with the story of my very first hospitalization when I was 12 years old. As an adult, I can recognize that this hospitalization was a major turning point in my life, as I lost my ability to trust other people, in particular my family and caregivers. This is where I really felt like no one truly cared about how I felt or thought about anything or what I was going through. The way that I ended up there is extremely messed up. It was a very deep betrayal that destroyed my relationship with my mom and my dad. In a previous episode, I have talked about how I experienced online grooming at the age of 11, and that I suspect that I went through childhood sexual trauma prior to that as well, that I just do not remember. My brain has blanked it out to protect myself. Um, and after this happened, I really started to show behavioral changes at 11 into 12. I definitely started really getting into darker things in life. I had this preoccupation with death. I really liked goth culture, and a lot of the music that I was listening to had fairly depressing lyrics. And my family, especially my dad, believed that my behavioral shifts were happening because of the music I was listening to, when in reality, I was gravitating towards the music that I was and darker things in life because I could relate to it. It reminded me, like, it didn't remind me, it showed me that I was not the only person carrying pain or struggling with difficult things. It helped me feel less alone. I mean, I don't like knowing that other people are struggling, but it did make it a little bit easier for me to cope with the things that I was going through. And after my stepmom and my dad got divorced, things at my dad's house became really, really tense. We would get into arguments quite a bit, and, you know, I had explosive emotions. I would yell a lot. Sometimes I would even break things. And there were times where my dad would try to grab my wrists and try to physically restrain me to calm me down, which had the complete opposite effect on me. It just made me even more volatile because I am the kind of person that when I feel unsafe or threatened, I fight. I respond by fighting. We either fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. And I am most definitely the kind of person that as soon as I feel threatened, I'm triggered and I just fight. I'll do whatever to get myself out of the situation that I'm in. And I just want to say that my dad never hit me or anything like that, but this was definitely something that, looking back, was not normal and not okay, and definitely not an appropriate way to respond when I was in that state. It literally just made things worse. But there was one specific day where I had asked my mom if she could trade nights with my dad. That way I could stay at my best friend's house and work on a science project that was due the very next day. I didn't want to go to my dad's house, and she said yes. When I called my dad and told him that my mom would switch, he refused to swap nights with her. He got extremely upset, saying, "It's my night and I'm coming to get you." I begged and he was not listening, so I hung up. And I cried to my friend as I waited for my dad to get there. And then once my dad got there, it's a blur how we ended up in the laundry room yelling at each other, but I remember him grabbing me again and I bit him to get him to release me. And I bolted out of the house into the setting sun and the pouring rain. It was storming outside. He apparently called my mom. My mom pulls up beside me in the minivan, and she's got our next door neighbor with her, who's the wife of a state trooper. They're trying to coax me into the van to get me out of the rain, and I just keep telling her that I do not feel safe going home with her. I do not feel safe going home with my dad. I want to go to my sister's house. My sister's always kind of been my saving grace in life, my rock. My sister is 8 years older than me, and so growing up, she always had like a better understanding of the family dynamics and what was going on, and she did what she could to protect me even as a child herself. And eventually my mom tells me that she will take me to my sister's house if I will just get in the van and get out of the rain. So I listen. I was happy with this answer. I'm starting to calm down while I'm in the van on the ride there, but then we pass my sister's exit. I point out that we passed it. My mom immediately starts crying and telling me, "Oh, Autumn, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I'm just freaking out. "Where are we going? I want to know where we're going. What, you've lied to me. What are you doing?" And the neighbor tells me that they are taking me to the hospital because I'm sick and I need help. We get to the hospital and there's a security guard waiting for me with a wheelchair as well as a couple of nurses. They tell me that I better not try running. They wheel me into the hospital and they put me in a room, handcuff me to a bed, and I get to spend the rest of the night, 12 years old, handcuffed to this bed, with people coming in and out, asking me all kinds of questions, my family coming in and out. My sister tells me that I can go to her house, and the very next morning, the doctor or the crisis worker, I honestly don't remember which one it was, asks me if I want to go to my dad's house or my mom's house. I say that I don't feel comfortable going home with either of them, especially after everything that had happened the night before. My mom had betrayed my trust, and my dad freaked me out. And they told me that my sister's not my legal guardian, so even if I had my parents' permission to go to her house, I cannot legally be released to go to her house. So they told me, since I am unwilling to go home with either parent, that I will be transported to another hospital. I was taken to my very first psychiatric hospital at 12 years old in handcuffs in the back of a cop car. When I got there, they placed me into this tiny little cement room, which had nothing in it. I heard them bring someone else in and place them in the room next to me, and this man was literally screaming that he was going to kill and rape people, and I heard banging coming from in his room. So I'm already scared of what is going on, and then I'm listening to that and I'm getting even more scared. The doctor finally comes into the room, and rather than asking me questions about like what's going on in my life, the doctor just asks me about, am I seeing things? The doctor does at one point ask me if everything's okay at home, but I didn't know what narcissism was, and neglect was normal for me. So, how am I supposed to know if something is wrong, if things that looking back now as an adult, I can recognize they're wrong, but as a child, that was normal. I did not understand that my home life was dysfunctional and not normal. So, how can I answer that question? The doctor didn't describe any kind of situation that would potentially be wrong. The doctor didn't probe about experiences I may have had. The doctor just immediately jumped to asking me questions that would lead to me getting a mental health, like a mental disorder diagnosis. I was willing to talk about experiences that I had had because I have been aware of my spiritual gifts since I was a young child. I repressed them for a while after this hospitalization because they tried to put me on antipsychotics for it. But I began lucid dreaming when I was just 5 years old, and I had had experiences with the Hat Man and shadow people. I do feel like schizophrenia is a real thing, but as my spiritual awakening has taken place, and I would most definitely be diagnosed as schizoaffective if I were to be honest with any kind of psychologist or psychiatrist about the way I talk to spirits. I'm clairaudient, I have hallucinations, the pattern recognition as well. If Western society were like other societies that have shamanic cultures, there would be a shaman or a medicine worker that would be able to recognize those symptoms, take the person under their wing, and help them harness their abilities and live with their abilities and utilize them to help the community and to help themselves rather than their gifts allowing them to suffer. There's a saying, I've said this before in some episodes, but I'm going to say it again because it's relevant. The schizophrenics and the psychotics drown in the same waters that the shamans and the mystics swim. People want to talk about spiritual psychosis, and that is a real thing, I will say, because you can get ungrounded and forget that you are still here having a human experience. You are still here existing in the 3D world, but there is more to this reality than a lot of people realize at this point, and not all of the cases of spiritual psychosis that people are talking about is actual spiritual psychosis. Once the doctor was finished talking to me and prescribing me antipsychotics, which should help the shadow people go away, I was put into this little room with some nurses where they made me strip down so they could check my body for scars and like cuts, self-harm marks and things like that, which I understand why they do this, but it was very uncomfortable as a child, and it was also very like undignified when I am already struggling with my mental health. And then they began sticking me with needles without even warning me. And this is how I got my needle phobia. You probably wouldn't guess that since I have piercings and tattoos, but it is completely different from needles that are injecting you with things and extracting your blood. They didn't warn me. They literally just started poking me with needles. So by the time I make it to my room, I am already extremely freaked out about this entire experience. And I am asking every single staff member I see, how long do I have to be here? When do I get to go home? And they're like, that's up for the doctor to decide. I was placed into this room where there was no mirror, but there used to be a mirror. You could see where there used to be a mirror. And I suspect that there was no mirror because the previous person in the room had used the mirror to try to harm themselves, because my bed was in like this little cubby area. And when I laid down at night, if I were to face the wall, like there's the door leading into my room, and then there's the cubby area that, you can't see that section of the wall unless you get into the bed. And when I would lay down at night, if I were to stare at that wall, I was staring at dried blood smears across this wall that they did not clean. It was also the middle of November and it was very cold out. I was only allowed to take short showers, like 5-minute showers in the morning or at night. My hair didn't dry. And when it came to nighttime, they only gave me a thin sheet to sleep with, and they never gave me a pillow the entire time I was there. And I asked for one and they never gave me one. I asked for extra blankets and they never gave me one. They just did not care. The food was also awful. Pretty much the only times I ate while I was there was like the little boxes of cereal they gave us in the morning. And then the staff members that worked with the 12 and under kids were pretty nice. They would sometimes bring us in like Big Macs or chicken nuggets. So I ate then. And then if my family brought stuff in, I would eat too. I was there for 6 days. I know that doesn't sound very long, but it was a very long time as a traumatized 12-year-old. The funny thing is about all of this experience, I actually had a dream about going to this hospital about 6 months before it actually happened. The whole time I was there, I was experiencing deja vu, and it dawned on me one night while I was laying in bed that I quite literally saw myself in that hospital 6 months before it happened. I had a premonition of it taking place, and this was another time where my spiritual gifts were very real to me, but I repressed them because I learned that people will think I'm crazy if I talk about what I experience. Once I got out of the hospital, I went on this whole downward spiral. I became the crazy girl at school. I remember having a crush on a boy, and I heard a rumor about how I saved one of his used napkins to perform voodoo on, which was not true. I was just a normal kid that was struggling with a really difficult home life, and I had just had this traumatic experience, and now I'm the crazy girl that nobody wants to be friends with. It also really damaged my relationship with the best friend whose house that I was at. And after this experience, I just kind of became an outcast, and I felt like I wasn't wanted anywhere and like I didn't belong anywhere, more so than what I had already felt. My next hospitalization came when I was 15 years old. That guy that had taken my virginity through rape he started talking to me again. And as a teenager with an underdeveloped frontal lobe, I believed that it was cool that an older guy was talking to me. I thought I was cool, but he was taking advantage of me, and I didn't understand that. One night when my parents were, well, one afternoon when my parents were out of town, he came by my house to have sex with me, and when we're done having sex, he starts talking about all of the flea bites on my legs because my dogs had fleas at the time. And he's like, your mom's neglecting you. Obviously, she is because she's not home and a 19-year-old is using me for sex. Um, he called an ambulance to report neglect, and they came to pick me up, and we're at the end of the driveway, and I'm trying to convince them not to take me when my grandmother is on her way home and she sees. So she stops and she ends up taking an ambulance ride with me to the hospital. And while we're in the hospital, I'm speaking to this crisis counselor, and this crisis counselor is literally asking me questions regarding bullying at school, asking me questions about my first hospitalization, asking me questions about like my grandfather dying and all of the death that had been surrounding my life ever since I was a young kid. And then she would also ask me about happy things too. And so the whole time I'm talking to her, my emotions are just fluctuating all over the place based on the questions she's asking me. I spend the night there. My mom even threatened to press charges against this teenager this 19-year-old when she got to the hospital. I begged her not to, and she actually didn't. She didn't press charges. The hospital didn't press charges, even though it went against state law. Um, anyway, the crisis counselor told me that my emotions were too unstable, so I would have to go back to a hospital. So I got to have my second hospitalization. This one was a little bit better, but I will say I do not feel like it was necessarily appropriate to send me to the hospital this time. You know, it is normal to be emotional when it comes to grief. It is normal to be emotional when talking about a traumatic experience that you had. They made it out to seem like something was wrong for me for having emotions about the things that I have experienced in my life. And this is when they put me on Zoloft. Zoloft was another big turning point in my life. I felt a lot of irritation and agitation all the time, and my suicidal ideation was getting worse on this medication. I expressed to my psychiatrist that I was not feeling better on it, that it was getting worse, and she just told me that that's because I'm not on the right dose yet, and she upped my dose. 2 weeks later, it was Black Friday. My mom left town to go to a craft show, and the guy that had taken my virginity comes back over to my house trying to make things up with me. But he brought friends. We all start drinking. We're robo tripping. He starts making out with a girl he brought. I got extremely upset because, again, I thought he liked me. I didn't realize he was just using me for sex because I was naive. As we're fighting, all of his friends went outside, and he and I got into it. I threatened to kill myself. He told me I wouldn't do it. And then I got 2 bottles of Ambien out of a 2-month supply of Ambien out of my stepdad's medicine cabinet, and I downed both bottles in just a couple of swallows. He told me that I was crazy, and then he walked out of the house and he left me to die. I remember sitting on the stairs, petting my dogs and telling them goodbye as I cried. I even called that 21-year-old from Vampire Freaks that was grooming me online because I thought he loved me. It went straight to voicemail. I just left him a voicemail crying. He never answered the phone if I called him. It always had to be him calling me. And that's because what he was doing was illegal. I don't remember passing out. I apparently blacked out before I did pass out, and I destroyed the living room. And then I passed out in my mom's bedroom and I fell face forward. Had I not fallen forward, I would have choked on my own saliva and died. My mom also came home from her craft show early. She said there wasn't a lot going on when we talked about it later on. But she had this feeling that she needed to come home. I wouldn't be alive right now had my mom not come home. Had she not trusted that gut feeling, I wouldn't be alive right now. They wanted to life flight me to the hospital, but there wasn't a helicopter available. So they got an ambulance out to the house. And then I started dying on the way to the hospital. Or at least that's what my mom tells me. Told me. I have no recollection. When I got to the hospital, I was placed on life support in the ICU, where I remained in a coma for several days. They didn't really know if I would wake up, and if I did wake up, they didn't know if I would have brain damage or not. I remember waking up and seeing my Nana sitting in the hospital room. When she saw I was awake, she offered me an apple, and she was just like, "You must be so hungry." And I remember taking that first bite of the apple and complaining about it being dusty, it being an old apple. It didn't have a crunch to it. And it was probably sitting in her fruit bowl for who knows how long. I was extremely grateful to be alive when I woke up in the hospital. I couldn't stand up right away since I had been in the coma and hadn't walked in days. My legs were jelly, and they removed my catheter and all of that and took me up to a normal room in the hospital. And my mom stayed with me overnight and helped me go to the bathroom and things like that. And then they told me that I would have to go to the psychiatric unit at the hospital to monitor me for a couple of days after all of that. And I was totally fine with going to the hospital this time because I was just really grateful that I survived. And I was in a good mood while I was at this hospital. I was so excited to get out and go home. But then I was told that I wouldn't get to go home. And my gratitude for my life turned into even more self-hatred, because my parents had agreed to send me off to a residential facility to live. And I just felt like my parents weren't grateful that I was alive, that they didn't want me at home, that they didn't love me or want me anymore. They just kind of like what I felt when I was 12 and I had my first hospitalization. I'm just a problem for them to send off. I'm broken. I felt unworthy of love. My residential facility was not that great either. They wanted to keep me there for a full year, but I was on my best behavior while I was there because I wanted to get out. I was only at this residential facility for 4.5 months out of the at least year-long treatment plan that they had for me because of my good behavior and complying with my treatment. After 3.5 months of being there, my insurance said since I'm complying and doing well and there are no complaints about me, that they're no longer going to pay for me to stay there. The facility then petitioned my insurance to try to get me to stay for the full plan or longer. And after a month of waiting for it to come back, they rejected the appeal, and I finally got to go home. And I was only able to talk to a therapist or a psychiatrist like once every 2 to 3 weeks. And only got to talk to them for 20 to 30 minutes every single time. Yet these people think they know me. And I'm this traumatized child that could not trust adults. So, of course, I was not honest about the experiences that had led to this, the experiences that had contribute to the mental illness that I was experiencing. Like, I felt like I could not tell anybody. I didn't trust anybody, so I didn't tell anybody. And so I did lie a lot as a teenager because I had to keep secrets. I couldn't trust anybody. And I got diagnosed with bipolar 2 with antisocial tendencies, as well as OCD, anxiety, major depressive disorder, and social anxiety while I was at this hospital. And they put me on a whole list of medications. And see, this is the thing about our mental health care system. They deem us as broken. They're so quick to put all of these labels on the human experience when, mental illness is more often than not a direct result of unhealed trauma. And rather than getting to the root of that trauma and asking the right kinds of questions that help children recognize that what they have gone through is trauma, and and creating a safe environment for them to open up to adults, they just give you this label and then they give you this medication, which then essentially gives you this chemical lobotomy. You are not yourself. I became a completely different person every single time that I was on medications. And on top of the physical symptoms that I had from some of the medications that I was on, I mean, I used to be on a very high dose of Seroquel, and I would get these really intense Charlie horses in my sleep. If I didn't fall asleep on the medication, that sleepy feeling would also subside, and I would feel like I had insects crawling under my skin. I experienced like involuntary muscle spasms and restless leg syndrome, which then made the Charlie horses even worse. I mean, sometimes I would start twitching in bed as I'm sleeping just for my muscles to lock up, and then I wake up screaming for a solid like 2 minutes as my muscle is just contracting and causing me excruciating pain. I have not been medicated since I have began processing all of my trauma, and I have been feeling the best I have ever felt. Sure, I still experience depression sometimes, but I think it's normal to experience heavy feelings with the things that are going on in the world, or when we've gone through difficult things or still are going through difficult things. I think it is 100% healthy to feel lower emotions as long as you are not constantly in that state. We have to feel it out to process it and be honest with ourselves. And personally, I feel like something like depression, especially, is depression and anxiety are completely normal responses given how the world is, where we really lack genuine human connection and community, and we're forced to work these extremely long hours, and our value to society is determined by our productivity. We're basically a number instead of a human being, and I feel like it is 100% normal to feel sad about the state of how our society is. After this hospitalization is when I started like abusing my stepdad's medications recreationally, on a daily basis trying to escape my reality. There is a good portion of 2 years of my life where I can barely recall things that happened, minus the traumatic events that happened. I even spoke to a social worker while blacked out on Ambien, and I do not remember it. Like, I remember taking the medication, and then I remember waking up and asking my stepdad, when's the social worker coming? And he's just like, you don't remember? She was here yesterday. Like, I literally do not remember 2 days worth of time. And that was something extremely common for me after I got out of that hospital, because I was just, the trauma had just compounded and compounded and compounded, and these hospitals did not help me. The forced hospitalization did not help me. It just made matters worse. I do want to talk about a positive hospital experience that I had, though, because it has not been all bad. The hospital the hospital stay that I had that was voluntary was the most beneficial to me, because kind of like an addict has to want it for themselves to get clean, someone that is experiencing severe mental health related to trauma, they have to want it for themselves to be able to heal. You cannot heal a person that is not ready to heal or that does not want to heal. They have to want it for themselves. And back in 2021, I reached that point where I was so miserable, I did want it for myself. And this is where my clairaudience really started kicking in for me after I had a very rough night where I did intend on killing myself. Um, Something inside of me that was not my ego voice of Autumn, it was not my mind, it was something deeper than that, told me to wait. And if I still felt that way, to do it tomorrow. And I still felt that way. And rather than doing it, I called my mom to ask her if she would be willing to watch my dogs for me so I could check myself into a mental hospital. And I told her that I was going to hurt myself if I didn't check myself in. And she told me that she was going to help me. She called my sister, who was working in mental health care at the time. And then um, my sister recommended taking me to a hospital. That way I could get a bed placement quicker than just going to a psychiatric hospital. And my mom thought it would be quicker to take me to my hometown hospital versus going to one in the city that are usually busier. So my mom came and picked me up. We got Five Guys on the way to the hospital because she was like, you're probably not going to have a really good meal for about a week. So she wanted to feed me. And then she took me to my hometown hospital, Murray Regional in Columbia, Tennessee. And I signed all kinds of paperwork stating for them to communicate every single step of the process with my mom, that she had permission to have full access to my medical records and my medical treatments. They told me that I would be able to call her once I got to the back. And the whole time, my mom is stressing that all of this is voluntary. You know, she chose this. This is her decision. They didn't treat it like it was my decision. Once I got back there, they would not let me call my mom. Once again, I was placed in an empty room with nothing in it, just a bed in the center, a beige colored room, no TV, nothing to write with, no books even. I wasn't even allowed to have a book. And I spent the night there completely in my head, unable to sleep. The next morning, they told me it was breakfast time. I got out to ask when I could call my mom. They told me that phone time was in a few hours, that I would have to wait until that time. I asked about how I would be transported, and they told me that they usually transport with an ambulance. And then they told me, but it could be a sheriff transporting me. I told them that I have trauma with police vehicles and that I need to be transported in an ambulance. I was upset about my phone call when I went back to my room, but I was not combative or anything like that. I was just very emotional because I was told I'd be able to speak to my mom. I went back to my room and I ended up falling asleep. They never woke me up from my phone call. Instead, I was woken up by a sheriff entering my room telling me that he was there to transport me. I immediately began crying and begging for my mom or an ambulance. At one point, I told him that I'm not a criminal and I don't want to be treated like one. And that is when he removed his handcuffs from his belt. And this grown ass man who weighed more than 300 pounds slammed me forward on the bed and put all of his body weight on my back while I had a sciatic nerve injury. I was just screaming about how he's hurting me while he's telling me that I'm hurting myself. He dragged me off the bed without giving me the opportunity to catch my footing, and he's just dangling me with my arms behind my back. I remember seeing spots as I'm hyperventilating and beginning to slump before he allows me to take a break and get up on my feet. Hospital security shows up with a wheelchair and has me get in the wheelchair. I start complaining about how tight the handcuffs are. Security agrees that they look too tight, so the cop takes them off to readjust them, and I had gashes in my wrists, and my wrists were already starting to bruise from the way that he was dragging me. Then I got wheeled out to the sheriff car waiting outside, off, with no AC on and the windows up on August 1st in Tennessee. If you have ever been to Tennessee in the dead of summer, you know that our days are like high 90s with a real feel of like 110 because of the humidity. And that cop car was so hot. I was also getting over a respiratory infection, which the hospital would not let me have my inhaler or any of my pain medications or infection medications. They just gave me medication for a UTI, and that's the only thing they gave me while I was there. And so once I got placed in this car, I'm in horrible pain from my back. I'm hyperventilating in the heat, and I began hacking up and freaking out in the car. The female sheriff and the male sheriff repeatedly open the doors to insult me. At one point, the female sheriff tells me that I'm gross because I'm spitting up in the car. And as I'm trying to argue about how I have an infection and I'm on an inhaler, she tells me that she's on an inhaler too, and she doesn't spit things up like that. They put a spit guard on me. Closed the door again. I started freaking out. I started kicking the top of the car trying to escape because once again, when I feel threatened, I am the kind of person that enters fight mode. So they open up the car again, handcuff, or I don't know if you call them handcuffs, but they leg shackle my legs together. They did not open the car to cut on the AC to give me air until they had watched me repeatedly slam my head against the glass. And then they opened the door and they asked me if it's my family watching me, which, by the way, it wasn't my family because my mom was never even notified that I was being transported despite me signing all of the paperwork. My mom didn't figure out I was transported until hours after I had already arrived at the other hospital. But they asked me if I was done behaving like that so they could get this over with. And I told them that I just needed air and that I'm in pain. And they told me that I wouldn't be in pain if I weren't resisting. The whole drive there, I got to listen to them talk about the people that they had had interactions with throughout the week. They referred to people as worthless junkies. By the time I arrived at the hospital, I was so traumatized by my experience that I refused to sign paperwork stating that I trusted that the hospital would provide me with respect and dignity and the care that I deserve. I didn't believe it because I had just been traumatized by this transportation experience. When I literally went to the hospital voluntarily, I wanted to go to a psychiatric hospital. They didn't have to do all that, but they did. They just wanted to have power and control over me. I also ended up on the wrong psychiatric ward at this psychiatric hospital because of this. I ended up on a behavioral unit with people who were violent in drug induced psychosis. I got placed on anxiety medication right away because my nervous system was so shot about the experience. I was taking anxiety medication 4 times a day when I was not previously on any kind of anxiety medication. They also took x-rays of my wrists right away because they're suspected there may be hairline fractures because I was having a hard time using my hands. There weren't any hairline fractures, but I had bruises that were stretching from my thumb down past my wrist on both hands. And then my back was in horrible pain the entire time I was there. But I will say that psychiatric hospital, this one I definitely want to name because if you live in Tennessee and you need help, go to Trust Point Hospital. They genuinely care, and they are one of the few psychiatric hospitals in the entire state that has a dedicated affective disorder ward. So this is a unit that is specifically designed for people that are struggling with like depression, bipolar, anxiety, and PTSD. The doctor who built the ward, he who created the ward, he would do like basically this seminar kind of thing 3 days out of the week where he talked about the reactive and proactive states within our brain and how to reprogram our brain. And this was my first run in with like positive neural programming, and it was the beginning of my healing journey. I did, I became grateful to be alive for the very first time. Um, I mean, since I had experienced waking up from my first suicide attempt, at least, like I was grateful to be alive, even though I was still struggling with a lot of things in my life. And then when I got out of the hospital, that's when the repercussions of the assault became fully apparent. I had been working 3 very physical jobs prior to going to the hospital because I was living in a 1 bedroom apartment trying to stay afloat while in massive amounts of debt thanks to COVID. Um, I went to work one day and the very next day I could not stand up straight. I was a foot shorter than normal, completely hunched over, walking bow-legged, only taking strides that were about 6 to 12 inches at the most. I could barely walk, and I had to have MRIs done on my spine. I had involuntary muscle spasms while I was in the MRI machine so bad that my neurosurgeon thought about having to sedate me to get an MRI because the images were so blurry from my muscle spasms that were involuntary that he was having a hard time seeing what was going on. But it turns out my assault had taken my L5 in my spine, which was compressing my sciatic nerve, and it had pushed it into my spinal cord. I had moderate compression in my spinal cord, and had it moved just a little bit more, it could have paralyzed me and potentially permanently. I had to have back surgery after that. I lost all 3 of my jobs. I lost my home, had to move back in with my elderly grandparents. I um I was in excruciating pain every single day. My grandfather would sometimes give me his pain medication due to my history of suicide attempts and history of drug use. They would not medicate me properly for the amount of pain that I was in. So my grandfather would give me his medications on the days he felt okay. And the police got away with this. They got away with the way that they treated me because when my mom tried to contact the department about what had happened, they told my mom that they were thinking about pressing charges against me for damaging police property and that that would carry jail time, like significant charges. So they scared me out of filing a lawsuit against the way they had treated me. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I called the Legal Aid Society trying to get a free lawyer, and they wouldn't even take my call. They wouldn't listen to anything I had to say. They wouldn't return my voicemail. So that was that. In the state of Tennessee, you only have a year to sue for something like that. And I tried complaining to the hospital as well. I made multiple phone calls to the hospital, and every single time, instead of getting to speak to the head of the hospital, I was sent to an answering machine to leave a voicemail, and not a single voicemail was ever returned to me. So there was absolutely no accountability for the way that they treated me. I did have another suicide attempt the following year, right after New Year's on January 8th, 2022. I had another triggered moment where I don't know how I survived with the amount of opiates that I took, because I had no tolerance to opiates. I didn't do opiates. But I took a cocktail of muscle relaxers, blood pressure medication, and opiates with alcohol. And I honestly do not know how I survived. I was angry that I survived when I came through a couple of days later. But after I had that DMT breakthrough, 2 months after that, I started to realize that I survived for a reason. There is a higher purpose for my life, and it isn't my time yet. And as things have just been unfolding over the last couple of years, between my mom's murder and my spiritual gifts fully coming online and understanding who I am at my core, and that I'm not really Autumn. I am this energetic being that is just playing this character as Autumn and having a human experience so I can understand myself better and evolve. I Things have just really been starting to click a lot more, you know? It doesn't mean that things aren't hard sometimes, but it is what it is. It's all happened with purpose, and it's taught me a lot about myself. It's taught me a lot about life. It's taught me a lot about existence and consciousness. But our mental health care system is extremely broken, and we shouldn't be forcing pharmaceuticals and labels on people as the first line of help. We should be doing more probing and having more curiosity and empathy, and allowing people safe spaces to feel seen and to be heard so that they can open up about what they're actually going through, because medications do not heal people. Forced hospitalizations, in many cases, do not heal people. To help heal people, you have to show them that their experience matters, that their story matters, and that they aren't broken, and that there is hope after the things that they have experienced. And you don't need medication to have a normal or a good or a happy life. You just have to process the things that you have gone through instead of running away from them or trying to numb them. We need more resources, and it needs to be more readily available, and we need to change the way that we are approaching mental health in this country. We're in a crisis, and it hasn't been getting better because of the way that we have been approaching mental health. And I don't know. I hope that sharing my story helps someone else feel less alone. I hope sharing my story shows people that no matter what you have been through in your life, that there is always hope, and you can still experience happiness, and that you are worthy and you matter and your story is important. This is long, I know. It's just something that's really been on my mind a lot lately, especially as I've been talking to people, and I'm always seeing online people that are struggling with their mental health. I have also been struggling with my mental health a lot over the last year, but I'm completely unmedicated and I have been in a much better position than I ever have, through the use of psychedelics to help me and then actually processing the things that I have been through. My mom was murdered and I haven't tried to kill myself. I have experienced horrific things, suspecting that my family's involved in what happened to my mom and the police not taking me seriously, and I haven't tried to kill myself. I have continued to be betrayed. I have fallen back into patterns of dating narcissistic men, and I haven't tried to kill myself. Sure, I've had days where I feel like I don't want to exist, but I don't want to give up because I want to know what happens next. I don't want to give up before the miracles take place in my life, and sometimes I feel really lost and like I don't know how my life's ever going to get better. But learning to talk about my experiences has at least been helping me gain more confidence in myself. It's been helping me connect with the right people that have been encouraging me to keep up with what I'm doing. I've said it before, I just want to be a real person in a world that's full of fake, and I want to show people that it's okay to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is a superpower in this world that tells you that it's not okay to feel anything. Feeling things makes us human, and it is important to feel because that's how we process and release. It's also how we connect to other human beings. I'll leave it there. If you have a personal story that you want to tell, whether it's your life story, something that's been helping you heal, something that brings you joy, or just a casual conversation about things that you've been experiencing, your spiritual awakening, I love hearing stories like that because you're not alone in those either, and you're not crazy. We are definitely living in very strange times right now, and the ones that think you're crazy just haven't woken up yet. Um, but if you have any story that you want to tell, I would absolutely love to hear it, to hold space for you, to give you the opportunity to be seen and to be heard because you are extremely valuable and your existence matters. Your story matters. And I am so grateful that I get to exist in the same time period that you do, whether or not we ever talk or have a connection, because your existence is truly something special because there is not a single person in the world that is like you. And you're not alone out there. Please reach out to me. My Instagram is electric honeypot. Um, Shoot me a message. I would love to travel to meet you, to hold space for you. I just want more human connection in my life because not trusting people and being disconnected from other human beings is what sent me on a downward spiral. And I've just been realizing how valuable human connection is and how valuable community is. And I'm trying to build a community where we can build each other up and have real conversations without judgment or shame and without toxic positivity because life is hard sometimes. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. And it's important to give space for even those difficult experiences and difficult emotions. The reason why we're harboring all of this pain inside of us is because we're not giving those things the proper space they need to be felt and released. We're all grieving. Grief doesn't just mean death. It can mean a lot of different things, whether it's grieving the loss of your physical health, grieving friendships that you thought would be in your life forever, or, grieving a dead loved one, grieving a pet, grieving your innocence lost. It's all grief, and grief wants to be held. It wants to be felt. It just wants a place, just as the happy emotions have a place, because it's all about letting things flow through you, not holding on to them and pushing them down and pretending like they don't exist only allows them to grow and to fester. And we just need to learn how to talk about things. And that's what I'm doing. Well, if you've made it this far, I'm really grateful that you took the time to listen to my story and what I have to say. I know I'm still new at this and not the best at it, but I feel like I'm getting better. We're never ready. You just have to start doing it and believe in yourself. And I'm just trying to have faith that I do have the ability to bring my dreams to life and to make a positive impact on this world in a bigger way than I already have through individual relationships with people that I've met. I'm trusting the process. Well, I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, night, week, month, year, and life. I love you so much, and I'm extremely grateful that you're here. Stay curious.